The Mont Blanc pen moved like a blade. Its nib scratched across crisp linen paper on the marble coffee table, a thin, dry sound that filled the penthouse the way smoke fills a room. The windows at 432 Park Avenue turned Central Park into a silent painting, all dark trees and cold light. Inside, everything gleamed: cream leather, polished stone, a glass decanter sweating beside a tumbler of Macallan with ice that clicked softly whenever the man across the table shifted his wrist. Catherine Wright sat on the edge of the cream-colored robo-sofa, hands folded in her lap. Navy cardigan, blue jeans, a tote bag at her feet with a frayed handle and a paperback peeking out. She looked like she had taken a wrong elevator into someone else's life and decided not to apologize for it. Daniel Wright did not look at her. He watched himself in the floor-to-ceiling glass. 42, sharp jaw, Tom Ford suit that fit like armor, a man who wore money like cologne and expected the world to lean back when he leaned forward. He swirled the Macallan once, savoring the faint burn, then set the tumbler down with a controlled tap. He slid a document across the table without meeting her eyes. "It's generous, Kate," he said, as if he were tipping a waiter. "2 million. The Jersey apartment. You keep the Honda. It's more than you had when I found you." The words landed with the casual cruelty of a shoe on a paperback. Catherine's gaze dropped to the paper, then lifted to him. Her voice stayed calm, almost musical, as if she were reading a line she had rehearsed 1,000 times in her head. "Found me," she repeated. "You make me sound like a stray dog, Daniel." Daniel scoffed and finally turned, the corner of his mouth curling with the confidence of someone who had never needed to be gentle to win. "Well, look at the facts. You were working in a dusty antique bookshop in the village when we met. You had student loans. You wore thrift store coats." He lifted his glass, ice chiming once. "I gave you this life, but we've evolved in different directions." "Evolved?" Catherine echoed. Her fingers tightened briefly, then relaxed again. "Is that what you call sleeping with your publicist?" The air shifted. Not loud, just the subtle change that happens right before a storm breaks. Daniel's eyes narrowed, a predator annoyed by the idea that his prey had teeth. At the far end of the penthouse, the private elevator chimed. A soft ding, then a whisper of doors sliding open. The click-clack of Louboutin heels crossed the marble like a metronome. Jessica Hart entered as if the room had been waiting for her, blonde, statuesque. A red Versace dress that caught the light and threw it back in sharp angles. Her Chanel bag swung once and landed on the armchair Catherine usually sat in to read, like a flag planted on conquered ground. Jessica did not look at Catherine. "Is it done, Richie?" she asked, voice sweet enough to rot teeth. Daniel's posture changed instantly. His shoulders loosened, his jaw softened. He turned toward Jessica like a flower turning toward sun. "Almost," he said. "Kate is reviewing the settlement." Jessica laughed, light and dismissive. She walked behind Daniel and draped her arms around his neck, leaning close enough that her perfume pushed into the space between him and his wife. She whispered, not quietly, "Don't be too difficult, honey. 2 million is a lot for a shop girl. Think of all the knitting supplies you can buy." Catherine rose slowly. No trembling, no outburst. She simply smoothed the wrinkles from her jeans, the small, careful gesture of someone refusing to give the room the satisfaction of her mess. "I don't want the 2 million, she said. Daniel pulled away from Jessica, annoyance tightening his face. "Excuse me? If you think you're going to fight this and get half, you're delusional," he snapped. "The prenup is ironclad. My lawyers are from Cravath. They'll bury you under legal fees before you even step inside a courtroom." Catherine's eyes flicked to Jessica, then returned to Daniel, steady and clear. "I don't want your money," she said again. "I don't want the Jersey apartment. Or the Honda." Daniel blinked, thrown off script. "Then what do you want?" "A clean break," Catherine replied. She reached into her tote bag. Not a velvet case, not a designer pouch, just canvas and paperback edges and the faint smell of old paper. Her hand closed around a pen and pulled it out. It wasn't a Mont Blanc. It was simpler, heavier, a fountain pen with a cap that caught the light for a second before her fingers covered it. A tiny crest, engraved near the top, half hidden by the way she held it. Daniel didn't notice. He was still looking at her like she had surprised him by speaking. "I will sign right now." Catherine said, setting the pen on the paper. Uncontested. I leave with what I came with. My books, my clothes, and my name. Jessica giggled. Your name? You mean Miller? Hold on to that legacy, sweetie. Catherine didn't give her the courtesy of a glance. She leaned over the marble table and signed with a fluid, practiced hand. No hesitation, no shaky line. The signature appeared as if it had been waiting to be written all along. Daniel's eyes followed the ink, not because he cared about her name, but because he cared about the finality of it. He checked the line twice, as if expecting a trap in the curls of her letters. When she straightened, the pen cap clicked shut. A small, crisp sound. Final, clean. Catherine met his gaze. I have one condition, she said. Daniel's brow lifted. Go on. The charity ball next week at the Pierre Hotel, Catherine said. The Global Humanitarian Gala. You're the keynote speaker. You insisted I attend months ago to keep up appearances. Her voice stayed even, but something colder moved under it. I want to attend one last public appearance as Mrs. Right before the announcement goes out on Monday. To save face. Relief loosened Daniel's shoulders. He let out a short laugh, the sound of a man who had expected war and found a surrender. That's it, he said. You want one last night of playing dress-up? Jessica rolled her eyes as if the request bored her. Fine, Daniel said quickly. Jess wasn't going to debut until next month anyway. Perfect, Catherine replied. She gathered her tote bag, slipped the pen inside, and closed it with a quiet zip. I'll have my things moved out by tonight, she said. Daniel hesitated, a flicker of something that might have been pity. Or ownership. Where will you go? The YMCA? Jessica offered, smiling. Catherine walked toward the elevator without rushing. At the doors, she pressed the button. The panel beeped. The sound was small, but it cut through the room's expensive silence. She turned back once. She smiled at them. Not warm, not bitter, just serene, like a lake that hides its depth. Oh, don't worry about me, Daniel, she said. I'm going home. The elevator doors slid shut, sealing her away. Daniel exhaled, the tension draining from him as if her presence had been a minor inconvenience he could finally erase. He turned to Jessica and grinned. That was easier than I thought. Jessica kissed him, leaving a red smear on his collar like a stain he didn't see yet. I told you she had no backbone, she murmured. Some people are born to rule, Richie. Some are born to serve. On the marble table, the divorce papers lay signed, ink still slightly glossy. Daniel lifted his tumbler and clinked it against Jessica's champagne flute. Ice chimed, glass rang, the sound of victory. They didn't notice the faint indentation Catherine's pen had left in the paper, deeper than necessary, like she had pressed down to make sure the line could never be erased. They toasted, smiling at the skyline. And somewhere inside Catherine's tote bag, under the edge of a paperback, the small crest on the pen cap caught the light one last time before the zipper swallowed it. The elevator descended without a sound. Catherine stood alone in the mirrored box, watching her own reflection steady itself in the cool, white light. The building's soft, mechanical hum vibrated through the soles of her shoes. For a few seconds, the city felt far away, as if Manhattan were nothing but a photograph sealed behind glass. When the doors opened, the lobby smelled faintly of polished stone and Lily's expensive cleanliness, carefully maintained. A doorman's smile flickered as he registered her cardigan and jeans, then sharpened into professional neutrality. Catherine walked past him anyway, unhurried, the tote bag bumping softly against her hip. Outside, the wind slapped cold against her cheeks. A line of black cars waited at the curb like obedient animals. She ignored them and stepped into the street, lifting her hand. A yellow cab rolled to a stop with a squeal of brakes. The driver leaned over, eyeing her through the rearview mirror. Where to? The Carlisle, Catherine said. The driver's eyebrows rose. He checked her again, no diamonds, no designer coat, then shrugged, flicked the meter, and pulled into traffic. The cab smelled like vinyl and old coffee. A faint pine air freshener swung from the mirror, tapping lightly against the glass with every turn. Catherine stared out the window as the city slid by doormen, scaffolding, a woman walking a tiny dog in a coat, steam curling from a grate like breath. Her phone lay in her palm. The screen was dark. She didn't unlock it. The silence inside her was not numbness. It was containment. like a sealed envelope. At a red light, the driver glanced back again. "Big night at the pier next week," he said, more to fill the air than to be helpful. "All those fancy charity people. Traffic's gonna be a nightmare." Catherine's mouth curved slightly, almost imperceptibly. "Yes," she said. "It will." The light turned green. The cab lurched forward. The city's noise pressed against the window's horns, distant sirens, the rhythmic slap of pedestrians' shoes on wet pavement. Catherine's tote bag rested on her lap, heavier than it looked. The zipper closed tight. The Carlyle's entrance glowed warm against the gray afternoon, its gold letters polished to a soft shine. People in tailored coats moved through the revolving doors with practiced ease. A bellman stepped forward automatically, then hesitated when he saw Catherine's jeans. "Ma'am," he began. Catherine didn't slow down. She turned slightly toward the side corridor, where a small, unmarked door sat flush with the wall like it didn't want attention. A discreet black reader waited beside it. She reached into her tote, fingers sliding past paper edges, and pulled out a card. Not a bright hotel key, not a plastic room key with a logo. A matte black card that swallowed light. She held it to the reader. Beep. The sound was clean and final. The door clicked open immediately. The bellman froze, his hand half raised, suddenly unsure of the rules he'd been trained to follow. Catherine stepped through without looking back. The hallway beyond was quieter, the air cooler, carrying the faint scent of old wood and something floral that felt real, not sprayed. The elevator at the end had no numbers visible, only a brushed metal panel and a single small screen. She tapped her card again. Beep. The doors slid open. Inside, the elevator was lined with dark wood, the kind that looked older than the building itself. Catherine pressed the only button that wasn't labeled, and the screen lit up. 30. The doors closed with a soft sigh. The car began to rise, smooth as if it were floating. Catherine's reflection stared back at her from the polished paneling. Her shoulders dropped, not with weakness but with release. The city's weight slid off her skin one invisible layer at a time. When the elevator opened, it wasn't to a hallway. It opened into a suite. The space beyond made even Daniel's penthouse feel loud. Gold leaf caught the light in muted glimmers. Louis XVI furniture sat arranged like it had been waiting for a queen to return. A thick carpet swallowed the sound of her footsteps. The air carried a clean, steep aroma tea, fresh and sharp, with citrus beneath it. By the window stood an elderly man in an impeccable butler's suit. His posture was perfectly straight. His hands were folded behind his back as if they belonged to an era where people were still trained to be silent on purpose. He didn't look surprised. He bowed. "Your Highness," he said. The words landed differently than any compliment Daniel had ever given her. They weren't flattery. They were fact. Catherine inhaled slowly, and for the first time all day, the breath reached the bottom of her lungs. "Hello, Alfred," she said, her voice steady. "Please tell me you have tea." Alfred's mouth softened into something close to a smile. "Earl Grey," he replied, moving with quiet precision toward a silver service that gleamed on a side table. "Imported this morning." The kettle's lid lifted without a sound. Steam rose in a thin ribbon. Alfred poured with the calm of a man who had poured through wars, weddings, funerals, and secrets. He offered the cup. Catherine took it, the porcelain warm against her fingers. "I trust the meeting with Mr. Wright went as expected," Alfred said. Catherine crossed the room and sat in a velvet armchair, her movements changing subtly, less guarded, more composed. The chair accepted her like it recognized her. "He was predictable," she said, taking a sip. The bergamot cut cleanly through her palate, bright and crisp. "He offered money to make me disappear." Alfred's gaze lowered, respectful and controlled, but his voice held a quiet disdain. "The arrogance of nouveau riche," he murmured. Catherine's eyes turned to the window. Manhattan's skyline glared back, all steel and ambition. "He thinks I'm destitute," she said, almost gently. Alfred set the teapot down. The silver made a soft clink, precise as punctuation. "And the gala?" he asked. Catherine's mouth didn't smile, but her eyes sharpened. "It will proceed." Alfred's hand moved toward a secure satellite phone resting on a table nearby. He didn't pick it up yet. He waited, the way servants wait, when the truth belongs to the person speaking. Your father was displeased, Alfred said carefully, but he is flying in, along with His Royal Highness the Crown Prince. Catherine's fingers tightened around the cup for a moment, then loosened. The tea trembled slightly, then stilled. Good, she said. Alfred stepped toward a large mannequin in the corner of the suite, covered in heavy velvet the color of night. It stood like a secret with shoulders. He paused, looking to Catherine for permission. She nodded once. Alfred lifted the velvet cover. The fabric whispered as it fell. Underneath was a dress that didn't just promise attention, it commanded it. Deep emerald silk, custom Dior, the kind of green that looked like it had been pulled from the heart of a gemstone. Draped across the bodice lay a sash, formal, unmistakable, pinned with a star that caught the light and threw it back in cold, clean flashes. On a velvet pillow beside it rested a tiara, diamonds arranged like frozen fire, old enough to carry history in its weight. Catherine stared at it without blinking. For years, she had worn softness like armor. She had made herself smaller in rooms that demanded a woman shrink to make a man feel tall. Now, the room offered her something else. A return to scale. Alfred's voice lowered, gentler than before. May I ask, Your Highness, why you stayed so long? Catherine set her cup down. The porcelain clicked softly against the saucer. She didn't answer immediately. She ran one finger along the edge of the velvet pillow, not touching the diamonds, just close enough to feel the cold radiating from them. Because I wanted to be sure, she said at last. Her words were quiet, but they carried. I wanted to see if a man could love Catherine, not Catalina. Alfred remained still, listening. Catherine's gaze lifted, meeting her own reflection in the window's darkened glass. He didn't, she said. The sentence wasn't dramatic. It was clinical. Then she stood. She walked to the mannequin and laid her hand against the emerald silk, feeling the smooth, expensive chill beneath her palm. Her fingers hovered near the sash, near the crest. You know the rule my father gave me when I left, she said. Alfred's eyes lowered. Yes, Your Highness. Catherine's voice sharpened just slightly, like a blade sliding free of its sheath. Never let a commoner make you feel common. She turned, and the suite's warm light caught her face in a new way. Not softer, stronger. The gala is his stage, she said. He thinks he'll dismiss me and walk away clean. Alfred's jaw set, almost imperceptibly. Catherine picked up her tote bag and placed it on the chair. The zipper slid open with a quiet rasp. Inside, beneath the paperback, her pen lay where she'd left it. The cap's tiny crest glinted once, then disappeared as her fingers closed the bag again. She looked at Alfred. Make sure they are seated where they can see the staircase, she said. Alfred inclined his head. As you wish. Catherine's eyes returned to the tiara, its diamonds catching light like judgment. Let him have one last night, she said softly. Let him think he's the king of New York. Her hand rested on the velvet pillow, close to the crown but not taking it yet, as if the final act deserved its own moment. Then, in the suite's quiet, the satellite phone's screen blinked once alive, waiting. Catherine didn't reach for it. Not yet. She lifted her tea again, the steam warming her face, and sat back as the city hummed outside, unaware that its loudest man had already been marked. Night gathered over Manhattan like a dark silk sheet pulled tight. In the Carlyle suite, the city's glow pressed against the windows, muted by thick drapes and old glass. Catherine stood barefoot on the carpet, her cardigan folded over the back of a chair, the steam from her tea thinning into the air. Alfred moved quietly through the space, opening drawers that looked untouched, checking locks that didn't need checking, arranging the room the way ritual demands order even when the heart is steady. The secure satellite phone sat on a side table beside the silver service. Its screen was black now, but Catherine could still feel its presence the way you feel a storm from inside a warm house. Alfred returned with a slim black case, longer than her forearm, and set it on the table with a careful, soundless precision. The leather was stamped with the same crest that hid on the cap of her pen, small, controlled, undeniable. He did not open it yet. He waited. Catherine's gaze flicked to it, then to the mannequin in the corner. The emerald gown hung like a verdict, silk drinking in the lamplight. The sash lay across the bodice, the star pinned where it would catch every chandelier in the pier and throw the light back in someone's face. Alfred cleared his throat softly. as if even words needed permission in this room. "The French ambassador's office confirmed the arrivals," he said. "The guest list has been amended under diplomatic protocol. Your father will enter with the ambassador. His Royal Highness will follow." Catherine's fingers slid around the warm porcelain of her cup. "And the press?" "Controlled," Alfred replied. "Not silenced, guided." He paused. "The photographers will be positioned where the staircase is in full frame." Catherine's mouth tightened slightly. It wasn't satisfaction. It was alignment. "Good," she said. Alfred reached for the velvet-covered mannequin, checking the seams of the gown without disturbing it. His hands moved like a surgeon's, minimal, exact. "The dress came from Geneva," he said. "The vault opened at 1600 hours. The courier delivered it at 1722. Receipt signed. Timestamp recorded." He placed a small slip of paper on the table, clipped neatly to a folder edge. Catherine glanced at it. A simple line. Date, hour, signature. Evidence that felt like steel under silk. Her phone buzzed once in her tote bag. The vibration was brief, controlled one pulse and then silence. Catherine didn't move to check it. Alfred looked at the bag anyway, as if he could hear the difference between a friend and a threat. "Is it the attorney?" Alfred asked. Catherine nodded. "Yes. You want me to respond?" "No." She set her cup down. The porcelain clicked softly against the saucer. "Everything is already signed." Alfred's eyes lowered. "Then there is nothing left to discuss." Catherine crossed the room toward the window. Outside, the city's traffic made thin ribbons of light, red and white, like veins. She rested her palm on the glass. It was cold, even through the double pane. Alfred spoke again, quieter. "Your father asked if you were, well," Catherine's breath fogged a small circle on the window. She watched it fade. "Tell him I'm fine," she said. "Tell him I'm finished being small." Alfred paused, then nodded. "As you wish, Your Highness." He moved to the side table and opened the slim black case. The hinges whispered. Inside lay a sash pin, wrapped carefully, and a small velvet pouch. He lifted the pouch and set it on the table in front of Catherine as if placing an oath. Catherine didn't open it yet. Instead, she returned to the mannequin and ran her fingertips lightly along the emerald silk. The fabric felt cool and impossibly smooth, like water that refused to spill. She imagined the Pierre ballroom crystals, flashbulbs, people who believed power was something you could buy and wear. She imagined the moment the fanfare would cut the room in half. Alfred's voice reached her from behind. "There is something else," he said. Catherine turned. He held a second folder now, thicker, leather-bound, stamped with the crest in gold. It looked heavier than paper should. He placed it on the marble table and slid it forward with 2 fingers. "The Heritage Trust documentation," he said, "and the Land Authority papers. The veto authority is confirmed." Catherine's gaze sharpened. "He's still pursuing the Provence permits." "Yes," Alfred said. "His office called again this afternoon. They requested an urgent meeting. They offered to fly representatives to Zurich." Catherine's eyes flickered with a quiet, amused cruelty. "Zurich," she murmured. "Of course." Alfred remained still. "They believe the trust is faceless." Catherine's fingers tapped once against the folder. A soft sound, a metronome counting down. "Let them believe it," she said. Alfred hesitated, then spoke. "Your Highness, there is a reason your father insisted on the rule." Catherine looked at him, waiting. Alfred's expression stayed neutral, but something protective moved beneath it. "Men like Mr. Wright do not grieve what they lose," he said. "They pursue it as property. If he cannot control you with affection, he will attempt it with desperation." Catherine's gaze didn't waver. "He can attempt whatever he wants," she replied. "He will not reach me." She stepped to the table and opened the velvet pouch. Inside was the tiara. Up close, it was less jewelry and more architecture. Diamonds set in a pattern so precise it looked engineered. The metal beneath was cool, heavy, ancient. Catherine lifted it with both hands, feeling its weight press into her palms. For a second, she saw herself reflected in the facets dozens of Catherines, dozens of Catalinas, all looking back with the same steady eyes. Alfred watched, without moving. "It has not been worn in public in decades," he said softly. Catherine held it in front of her, letting the light strike it. The diamonds answered with cold fire. "It will be," she said. She set it back down carefully, as if placing a crown on an altar. Then she opened the black case and took out the sash pin. The crest on it was small but sharp. It caught the lamplight and threw a thin line across the table like a blade. Catherine's fingers closed around it. A quiet knock sounded at the suite's private door. Alfred went to it without hurry, opened it a fraction, and accepted a sealed envelope from someone unseen. The envelope was thick, cream paper, the seal pressed deep. Alfred's thumb brushed the seal once, then he carried it to Catherine. He placed it on the table beside the Heritage Trust folder. "From the embassy," Alfred said. Catherine looked at the seal. Another crest, different from hers, but familiar enough. Diplomacy, protocol, eyes everywhere. She slid a fingertip under it, broke it cleanly, and unfolded the paper inside. Her eyes moved once across the lines. Then she looked up. "The ambassador will announce us at the top of the staircase," she said. Alfred inclined his head. "Yes, Your Highness." Catherine folded the paper again, slowly, and set it down beside the tiara. The room felt impossibly quiet after that, as if even Manhattan were holding its breath. She walked back to the window and stared out at the skyline. Somewhere out there, Daniel was polishing his image, rehearsing charm, believing he had already won. Catherine's reflection in the glass looked calm, almost gentle, but her hand, resting on the sill, curled around the sash pin until the metal bit lightly into her skin. In the stillness, the only sound was the faint, distant hum of the city, and beneath it, the soft whisper of silk moving when Alfred adjusted the emerald gown, preparing it for the night it would end a man. Morning in Midtown had teeth. The wind funneled between glass towers and slapped at the flags outside Wright Capital's headquarters, snapping fabric like warnings. Inside, the lobby smelled of polished stone and expensive coffee, the kind brewed to keep men awake long enough to make decisions that ruined other people's lives. Daniel Wright strode through the revolving doors with the confidence of someone who believed the city owed him space. His shoes clicked hard against the marble, sharp and impatient. A security guard nodded too quickly. A receptionist straightened too late. Daniel didn't slow down for either. Upstairs, the boardroom was already humming low voices. The soft whir of a projector, the faint buzz of phones vibrating on glass tables. A wall of screens glowed with maps and charts. Europe lit up in blue, profit projections in clean green lines, a contract value circled in bold. 40 billion. The number sat on the screen like a crown. David, the VP of Operations, stood at the head of the table with a remote in one hand and a stack of folders in the other. His tie looked slightly crooked, as if he'd dressed in a hurry. He swallowed when Daniel entered. "Where are we?" Daniel asked, not waiting for an answer as he pulled his chair back. Leather sighed under him. He set his phone down face up, as if daring it to interrupt. "Brussels," David began, tapping the remote. A slide changed an aerial image of rolling green land in southern France, punctuated by old stone buildings and lines of planned infrastructure. "The regulatory committee is stalling. The permit requires approval from the Council of Historic Preservation. Specifically, the land corridor we need in Provence has protected status." Daniel's eyes narrowed, already annoyed. "So we reroute." "We can't," David said quickly. "Not without losing efficiency and the entire pricing model. That corridor is the deal." Daniel leaned back and exhaled through his nose. The ice in his water glass clinked as he shifted. "Then we buy whatever we need." David hesitated. His knuckles whitened around the remote. "That's the issue. The land isn't held by a typical owner. It belongs to a heritage trust. They have veto power. And they don't respond." The boardroom's air felt suddenly thinner, like someone had cracked a window in winter. Daniel's mouth twitched, halfway to a smile. "Everyone responds. They're just waiting for the right number." On the wall screen, David clicked to a page of legal text, highlighted in yellow. Words like covenant, preservation, charter, trust, authority. The language was dense, designed to stop impatient men by exhausting them. Daniel didn't read it. He looked at the bottom line. "Veto," David cleared his throat. "The trust is tied to a collateral branch of European royal families, Spanish and Luxembourg lines. It's complex." Daniel waved a hand as if shooing away a fly. "Complex means expensive." "Fine. Offer double market value." A few board members exchanged glances. Someone's pen tapped once, then stopped. Daniel leaned forward, voice sharpening. "What's the name of this trust?" David shuffled papers, the soft whisper of cardstock against cardstock. The sound carried in the room's hush. He found the page, then paused, as if reading the name out loud might make it real. "The Duchy of Palmer and Piacenza," he said. "Held in trust. The head of the trust is private. We've tried to secure a meeting through Zurich Council. They ghosted us." Daniel's jaw tightened at the word ghosted. Like the idea of being ignored offended him on a cellular level. "Keep pushing," Daniel snapped. "I don't care if it's the King of England. Someone will take money." His phone buzzed once, a hard vibration against glass. He glanced at the screen and dismissed it without reading, thumb flicking as if swiping away a mosquito. Across the table, Jessica Hart sat with her tablet propped at an angle, typing notes with a manicured finger. She wore a tailored white blazer that made her look like a headline in human form. Her perfume cut through the coffee scent like something sharper. When Daniel finished speaking, she looked up and smiled, slow and confident. "You can charm anyone, Richie," she said. "Especially at the gala. You're the keynote speaker. Everyone important will be there." Daniel's lips curved. The word keynote landed on his ego like a warm hand. David changed the slide again. A photo of the French ambassador appeared. Henry Dequa, mid-handshake, formal smile, flag pins in his lapel. "This is our next step," David said. "If we can get the ambassador's support, he can open doors. He's attending the Global Humanitarian Gala this Saturday at the Pierre." Daniel's eyes sharpened, predatory focus locking in. "Then that's where I'll get what I need." Jessica's smile widened. "We'll get what we need." Daniel stood, palms flattening on the table. The leather chair creaked behind him, a small sound of impatience. "I want a meeting confirmed by end of day," he said. "With the trust, with the ambassador, with whoever signs that paper." David nodded too fast. "Yes. And draft the offer," Daniel continued. "Double market value. Add philanthropic language if you need to. Preservation grants, museum wing, whatever makes them feel noble." A quiet, bitter irony hung in the air. Daniel using charity as a crowbar. He didn't notice it. He picked up a thick folder labeled EU Grid Project and tucked it under his arm like a trophy. The edges of the papers inside were crisp, untouched by doubt. As he walked toward the door, the screens behind him still glowed with the Provence corridor, the route line drawn in confident red, a line that assumed the world would move out of the way. Jessica fell into step beside him, heels clicking in sync with his stride. "After the gala," she murmured, "the world's going to see us differently." Daniel glanced at her, pleased. "They already do." They passed the glass wall that overlooked the trading floor. Below, rows of desks pulsed with activity, phones ringing, keyboards clattering, numbers flashing. The sound was a living engine built on belief. Belief in Daniel Wright. Belief that the deal was inevitable. Belief that nothing existed beyond the reach of his wallet. David stayed behind in the boardroom, staring at the words Duchy of Palmer and Piacenza on the paper in his hand. He swallowed and wiped his palm on his trouser leg, leaving a faint, dark mark from sweat. On his laptop, an email draft sat open, addressed to a trust contact in Zurich. Subject line, "Urgent request for meeting." He hit send. The message whooshed away into the invisible web of wealth and influence. No reply came. Not yet. Outside, Daniel stepped into his office and looked out at Manhattan as if it were his personal map. Sunlight flashed off the neighboring skyscrapers, hard and blinding. He smiled. His reflection smiled back. And somewhere behind the glass, far from this boardroom's hum, a crest pressed into leather waited to turn his $40 billion crown into a noose. The Pierre's entrance glowed like a promise and a trap. Spotlights swept the curb in slow arcs, washing over velvet ropes, polished shoes, and faces trained to look calm in front of cameras. Limousines and black SUVs rolled in with the quiet authority of old money. Every few seconds, a burst of flashbulbs turned the night white. Daniel stepped out of his Rolls-Royce Phantom first, adjusting the cuff of his suit as if the entire street were his boardroom. The air smelled of cold stone and fresh flowers arranged too perfectly to be real. His breath fogged faintly, then disappeared. Jessica slid out beside him like a headline made flesh. She wore a sheer, silver dress that caught every beam of light and threw it back in glittering fragments. The fabric clung like liquid, designed to punish anyone who tried not to look. Her heels clicked sharply on the pavement, a fast, hungry rhythm. "They love us," she whispered, lifting her chin toward the paparazzi. "Look." Daniel's smile widened as cameras called his name. He raised a hand, practiced and effortless, as if applause were a natural weather pattern that followed him. A reporter shouted something about the EU deal. Daniel didn't answer. He only smiled, already imagining the next week's stock chart climbing like a rocket. Inside, the grand ballroom was a cathedral built for wealth. Crystal chandeliers hung like frozen waterfalls. Gold leaf caught the light along the columns. The air carried a mix of expensive perfume, champagne, and lilies so fresh they still smelled faintly green. A string quartet played near the stage, the music elegant and controlled, like a room full of power pretending it wasn't. Daniel moved through the crowd immediately, handshakes crisp, laughter placed with precision. He greeted senators and CEOs the way a man greets assets quickly, efficiently, with the subtle message that he could be useful. Jessica hovered half a step behind, smiling at the right moments, scanning for cameras as if they were oxygen. Daniel's eyes kept darting toward the VIP section. He needed the French ambassador. He spotted him near the stage, Henry Dequa, a slim man in a tuxedo with a flag pin on his lapel, speaking to a small circle of donors. Daniel's shoulders relaxed, his gaze sharpening into focus. "There," he murmured, steering Jessica forward. "Let's seal it." They moved through the crowd, the carpet swallowing their footsteps. Daniel's confidence grew with every step, as if proximity to the ambassador were already profit. Then, something shifted. Not a voice, not an announcement. A collective change in posture, like an invisible hand pressing down on the room. Conversations thinned. Laughter died mid-breath. Heads turned in the same direction, fast and synchronized, as if everyone had been trained by the same script. Daniel slowed, confused. The quartet's bows faltered. A violin note stretched too long, then snapped into silence. For one beat, the ballroom held only the soft clink of glass and the distant hum of the building's ventilation. "What's going on?" Jessica whispered, annoyance creeping into her tone. "A surprise performance?" Daniel didn't answer. His eyes followed the line of gazes toward the massive double doors at the top of the grand staircase. The doors were carved, heavy, ceremonial, built to open for someone important. A formal fanfare cut through the quiet. Not music meant to entertain. Music meant to announce. The master of ceremonies stepped to the microphone. His face was pale beneath the stage lights. He looked like a man who had suddenly remembered what reverence felt like. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, voice amplified, unsteady at the edges. "Please rise." Chairs scraped softly as the room obeyed. Daniel frowned, irritation flaring. Rise for who? He'd met presidents without being asked to stand. But the room wasn't looking at him. It wasn't looking at Jessica's silver dress. It was looking up. The MC swallowed, then continued, each title heavier than the last. "Please welcome His Royal Highness, Grand Duke Henry of the House of Bourbon-Palmer." A murmur rolled through the crowd like wind through dry leaves. Daniel's grip tightened on his champagne flute. "His Royal Highness, Crown Prince Alexander." More murmurs. More stillness. A few donors straightened as if their spines were being pulled upward by strings. And the MC's voice dropped, almost reverent. "Her Royal Highness, Princess Catalina." The doors swung open. 3 figures stepped onto the balcony above the staircase, framed by light so warm it looked like fire. On the left, the Grand Duke stood tall, broad-shouldered, gray hair cut sharp, medals glinting on his chest. His expression didn't invite admiration. It demanded compliance. On the right, the Crown Prince moved with calm, practiced grace, a red sash cutting across his tuxedo like a blade of color. And in the center, Daniel's stomach dropped. Because the woman in the center had Catherine's face, but everything else had changed. She stood taller in heels that didn't apologize. Emerald silk draped her like authority. A royal sash crossed her torso, pinned with a star that flashed cold under the chandeliers. And on her head, Catching every beam of light and throwing it back in hard, merciless shards, sat a diamond tiara so heavy it looked like history. For a second, Daniel's brain refused the image. He saw the cardigan, the jeans, the tote bag. Then he saw the crown. His hand loosened. The champagne flute slipped, fell, and shattered on the marble floor with a sharp crack that sounded obscene in the sudden hush. Jessica inhaled so hard it turned into a gasp. "That's—" her voice broke. "That's your wife." "No," Daniel whispered, the word thin, brittle. "That's not—" The room moved without him. A wave of motion rippled from the front row outward, heads bowing, bodies angling into curtsies, hands lowering drinks as if even glass needed to show respect. Ambassadors dipped their chins. Billionaires' men Daniel had idolized paused mid-smile and bent, suddenly aware of a hierarchy that didn't include market caps. Daniel stayed upright, frozen. It made him look wrong, like a man in the wrong uniform at a ceremony where uniforms mattered. Princess Catalina began to descend the staircase. The emerald gown whispered against each step, a soft shh that carried farther than it should have. She didn't look down to watch her footing. She looked straight ahead, her gaze steady, her face calm, almost gentle yet untouchable. The French ambassador broke from his circle and hurried forward. When he reached the bottom of the stairs, he didn't offer his hand. He bowed, low. Then he lifted Catalina's hand and kissed it. "Your Highness," he said, voice clear in the ballroom's acoustics. "We are honored by your presence." Daniel felt the room tilt. The ambassador he'd planned to charm was now kneeling in front of the woman he'd dismissed. Catalina smiled, diplomatic and controlled. "Thank you, Ambassador," she said. "Forgive the discretion. I have been observing life in New York incognito." The word incognito landed like a slap. Daniel's mouth opened, but nothing came out. Jessica's nails dug into Daniel's arm. "Do something," she hissed through her smile, eyes wild. "Why is she wearing a crown? People are looking at us like we're stupid." They were. Daniel felt it in the air, the subtle shift of attention, the way whispers began to snake through the room. Glances sliding from Catalina's sash to Daniel's face, connecting dots with quiet cruelty. His pulse hammered in his ears, louder than the fanfare had been. He stepped forward, pushing through the crowd as if force could restore the world to the version he understood. The ballroom parted for Catalina. It did not part for him. He reached the front just as the ambassador straightened. Daniel's voice cracked on the first syllable, the desperation in it raw. "Kate!" he blurted. The name sounded wrong in this room. It sounded small. The silence that followed wasn't empty. It was full of judgment, thick enough to choke on. And Catalina turned her head slowly toward him, the diamonds on her tiara catching the light as if they were turning to look too. Daniel's voice hung in the air like a bad smell. The people nearest the staircase didn't move. They didn't cough. They didn't even blink the way they had been blinking all night to keep the champagne from softening their eyes. Their faces turned into masks, polite, blank, intensely interested. Catalina regarded him without surprise. Up close, the difference was sharper. The woman who used to soften her posture in rooms like this stood perfectly aligned, shoulders back, chin level. The emerald silk held to her frame like it had been designed for her bones. The diamonds above her brow threw cold sparks onto her cheekbones each time she shifted her head. Daniel took another step, as if proximity could force reality into place. "What is this?" he demanded, louder than he meant to. His laugh came out thin, false. "Some kind of costume? A joke? Take that thing off your head." The ambassador's face tightened with horror, as if Daniel had just spit on the carpet. A ripple passed through the crowd, barely audible, like fabric brushing fabric. A senator in the front row lowered his eyes. Someone's hand trembled around a flute. The room's attention narrowed to a single point. Daniel, standing where he didn't belong, speaking a language of entitlement to a system that ran on protocol. The Grand Duke moved. He didn't rush. He didn't need to. The small space in front of Catalina emptied as if the air itself made room for him. He stepped forward, metals catching the chandelier light in hard flashes, and looked down at Daniel with a stillness that felt like a weapon. "I beg your pardon," he said, voice low and heavy. "Who is this man who dares address my daughter in such a manner?" The words were slow, measured, and they landed with the weight of a gavel. Daniel's mouth opened again, reflexively, but pride got there first. He pointed at Catalina as if pointing could shrink her. "I'm her husband," he snapped. "Catherine Wright. She's—" He swallowed at the end, the sentence catching in his throat as if even his tongue didn't believe it anymore. Catalina's gaze didn't flinch. "Daniel," she said, and his name sounded like something she had once carried and had now put down. "You seem confused." She turned slightly, the sash shifting across her torso with a soft whisper, and gestured calmly to the men beside her. "This is my father, Grand Duke Henry," she said, "and this is my brother, Crown Prince Alexander." The Crown Prince's expression stayed polite, but his eyes were cold, assessing Daniel like a security threat. Catalina took one step closer. The scent around her was subtle, clean, nothing sharp, nothing loud, like tea and winter air. Her voice dropped, quiet enough that only Daniel, Jessica, the ambassador, and the small circle closest could hear. "And I am not Catherine Wright," she said. "My name is Princess Catalina Marie of the House of Bourbon-Palmer." Daniel's face drained, the blood leaving as if his body was trying to protect itself from what it was hearing. Catalina's lips curved, small, controlled. "And as of this morning," she continued, "when you signed those papers, I am happily divorced." Jessica made a strangled sound beside Daniel, half gasp, half protest. Her eyes flicked to the cameras on the edges of the room, already imagining headlines. She forced a smile that looked painted on. Catalina's gaze shifted to the ambassador. "Henry," she said, tone effortless, as if they were in a private room instead of a ballroom full of witness. "Is this the man representing Wright Capital, the one seeking permits for the land in Provence?" The ambassador straightened, throat working. He looked briefly at Daniel, then away, as if the association might stain him. "Yes, Your Highness," he said. Catalina nodded once. The motion made the diamonds above her brow flash like ice. "I see." She turned her eyes back to Daniel. A cruel softness settled on her face, the way a surgeon looks at a patient before making the first cut. "Well," she said, "as head of the Heritage Trust that holds that land, I'm afraid the answer is no." The sentence was calm. It wasn't shouted. It didn't need to be. Daniel's breath hitched. For a fraction of a second he tried to speak, but nothing came out except a thin, useless noise. The 40 billion he'd been carrying like a certainty shattered in his chest without making a sound. "Catalina Kate," he stammered, reaching forward. His hand moved on instinct, the old reflex of ownership. He didn't touch her. Two security men in dark suits appeared as if summoned by the thought. They stepped between Daniel and Catalina with brutal efficiency, shoulders squared, hands low and ready. Their presence was silent, but it changed everything. One of them spoke, voice flat, dangerous. "Do not touch Her Royal Highness." Daniel's fingers froze mid-air. Jessica's panic flipped into survival so fast it was almost impressive. She stepped forward, voice brightening, trying to turn disaster into opportunity. "Oh my God," she breathed, eyes wide with practiced awe. "Kate, Your Highness, I always knew there was something special about you." "I told Daniel, didn't I?" I said. Catalina looked at her. Just looked. Jessica's words died on her tongue. Catalina's gaze moved over the silver dress, the exposed skin, the desperate glitter. Then her eyes returned to Jessica's face with a stillness that felt like a verdict. "Miss Hart," Catalina said, voice even, "I believe you have my husband." Jessica's smile twitched. "You can keep him," Catalina added. The cruelty wasn't in volume. It was in the simplicity, the way she spoke as if transferring ownership of something worthless. Daniel flinched as if struck. Catalina turned back to the ambassador, already shifting her attention away from him as if he were background noise. "Ambassador," she said, "please extend my apologies to the committee. Integrity is not negotiable." The ambassador bowed again deeply, eager to align himself with the stronger current. "Yes, Your Highness." Daniel's ears roared. He felt eyes on him from every direction, investors, politicians, strangers with phones lifted just high enough to record without looking rude. A man near the front pretended to sip champagne while his camera lens stayed pointed at Daniel's face. Daniel tried to regain control. He straightened his shoulders, forced a laugh, forced air into his lungs. "This is insane," he said too loudly. "You can't just— This is America." The Crown Prince's mouth tightened, a brief flicker of amusement that didn't reach his eyes. Catalina didn't respond. She didn't need to. She turned and began to walk into the crowd, the sea of people parting for her with instinctive deference. The emerald gown moved like water. The sash stayed perfectly in place. The diamonds above her brow caught every chandelier and threw light into 100 watching faces. Daniel stood behind the security line, unable to follow. Behind him, the shattered champagne glass glittered on the marble like a constellation of his own arrogance. Jessica's nails dug into his sleeve again, harder this time. Her whisper was sharp and furious. "You humiliated us," she hissed. "Fix it." Daniel didn't answer. He couldn't stop staring at the space where Catalina had been, the air still faintly scented with flowers and something colder, something like the edge of winter. Around him, the whispers grew louder, more confident, turning into laughter that people tried to hide behind their hands. Daniel had come to the Pierre expecting to charm a gatekeeper. Instead, he had just been introduced properly to the gate, and it had closed in his face. Monday morning tasted like metal. Daniel woke to the stale dryness of a hotel room that had tried too hard to feel luxurious. The Pierre's curtains were half drawn, letting in a strip of gray winter light that cut across the carpet like a blade. His mouth felt like cotton. His head throbbed in time with the dull pulse behind his eyes. Beside him, Jessica sat upright on the bed, already dressed, her hair sleek, her face pale under makeup that couldn't hide panic. Her phone screen lit her features from below, turning her into a ghost with perfect cheekbones. "Have you seen this?" she snapped, shoving the phone toward him. A tabloid headline filled the screen in thick black letters. A split photo underneath. Catalina in emerald and diamonds, serene. Daniel mid-shout, flushed and sweating, finger pointed like a weapon. Jessica behind him, caught between shock and calculation. Jessica's voice rose as she scrolled. "My comments are a war zone. I lost followers overnight. Brands are asking questions. Daniel, fix this." Daniel pushed himself up, the sheet sliding off his shoulder. The room smelled faintly of expensive detergent and last night's champagne. "It's tabloids," he muttered, rubbing his temples. "This will blow over. The news cycle moves fast." Jessica stared at him as if he'd just spoken another language. "You're not listening. This isn't about gossip. This is about status." Daniel swung his legs off the bed. The carpet was cold under his feet. He crossed to the minibar, poured water, swallowed hard, and felt it hit his stomach like a stone. His phone buzzed, then buzzed again, and again. The vibration kept coming in waves, relentless, like a heartbeat he couldn't control. He looked at the screen. Missed calls, messages, numbers he recognized and numbers he didn't. A board member, an analyst, a reporter, a client. Daniel didn't answer. He dressed quickly, shirt buttons fumbled, tie yanked too tight, his movements sharp with irritation. He refused to think about the ballroom, the bowing heads, the security guard's flat voice. He refused to think about the word divorced. Downstairs, the hotel lobby smelled of lilies and polished brass. People glanced at him and then looked away too fast, pretending they hadn't recognized the face from their phones. A man near the front desk coughed and lowered his head as Daniel passed, the way people did when they didn't want to be seen near something contagious. Radioactive. Daniel felt it without needing to name it. At Wright Capital, the lobby was wrong. Usually it pulsed with movement assistants in heels, traders with coffee, tourists taking photos of the logo like it meant something. Today, small clusters of employees stood too close together, whispering. When Daniel stepped through the doors, conversations snapped off like lights. Eyes dropped to the floor. A receptionist who normally greeted him by name didn't look up from her screen. Her fingers moved too fast on the keyboard. Daniel's jaw tightened. He rode the elevator up alone. The ride felt longer than usual. The soft hum of the cables sounded like a threat. When the doors opened to his floor, his assistant's desk was empty. His office door stood slightly ajar. Daniel pushed inside. The air smelled of toner, burnt coffee, and something faintly chemical printer heat. His Bloomberg terminal was already on, the screen filled with red. The numbers didn't just look bad. They looked violent. David walked in behind him, holding a stack of papers so thick it bowed in the middle. His eyes were bloodshot. His tie was gone. He looked like someone who had been awake for days. "Tell me the EU deal is salvageable," Daniel said immediately, voice hard. "I'll fly to Brussels. I'll apologize. I'll—" "It's not just the deal," David cut in, and the fact that he interrupted Daniel at all sent a small shock through the room. "It's the stock." Daniel turned sharply. "What about it?" David placed the papers on the desk with a heavy slap. "Look." Daniel's gaze snapped to the Bloomberg screen. Right Capital's ticker sat at the top, and beside it, a number that made his stomach drop. Down 38% in pre-market. The line on the graph didn't slope. It fell. A cliff dive. Daniel stared, waiting for the screen to correct itself. It didn't. "Why?" His voice came out too loud. "Because of a princess? Because of a headline?" David's swallow was audible in the silence. He pulled one sheet from the stack and slid it forward. A disclosure form, highlighted in bright yellow. "Because of this?" David said quietly. "In the EU project filings, we listed the Provence land acquisition as secured pending signature. We leveraged assets based on that corridor being ours." Daniel's fingers tightened on the edge of the desk. "It was pending. That's not lying." "It becomes lying," David said, voice shaking now, "when the person who owns the land publicly states they will never sell. Investors see that as misleading. The SEC is opening an inquiry. They think we pumped the stock by implying we had a lock." The words inquiry and SEC hit like cold water. Daniel's mouth went dry. His eyes flicked to the stack of papers again. There were more. Client notices, media requests, internal memos, a printed screenshot of a pension fund statement. David slid another page forward. "The Ohio Teachers Pension Fund," he said. "They liquidated their position this morning. $500 million. Gone." Daniel's breathing turned shallow. The office felt smaller, the walls inching inward. "This is her," he murmured, almost to himself. "She planned this." David didn't argue. Instead, he took out his phone and tapped through a screen, then held it out. Flight logs. A list of tail numbers, times, departure, arrival. Daniel squinted. "She's in Europe," he said, as if insisting it would make it true. "I'll go. I'll get a photo with her, if the market sees us making peace." "She's not in Europe," David said, and the pity in his tone was worse than anger. Daniel's eyes snapped up. David pointed at the last line on the screen. "The royal delegation flew to the Cayman Islands this morning." Daniel blinked. "The Caymans? Why?" David's fingers tightened around the phone. "That's where the headquarters of the Royal Holding Company is." The printer in the corner whirred suddenly, spitting out another page with a harsh mechanical rattle. Toner smell sharpened in the air. David's eyes didn't leave Daniel's face. "And Daniel," he added, voice low, "that's where our company's debt is serviced." The words landed slowly, one after another, like steps down into a basement. Daniel felt a chill crawl up the back of his neck, cold and crawling, despite the heat pumping through the vents. He didn't understand the full mechanism yet, only the shape of it. A machine. A system. A hand on the switch. His phone buzzed again, harder this time, as if even the device sensed urgency. Daniel grabbed it and dialed the one number he hadn't called in years, his thumb shaking slightly as he pressed the screen. The call didn't ring. A flat, automated voice answered immediately. "The number you have reached is no longer in service." Daniel froze, staring at the phone as if it had betrayed him. He tried again. Same voice. Same finality. The air in the office felt suddenly sterile, like a hospital room right before bad news. Daniel slammed the phone onto the desk. The sound cracked through the room. "Get my jet ready," he barked, voice raw with panic disguised as command. "I'm going to find her." David didn't move. His gaze held Daniel's, steady and exhausted. Daniel's reflection stared back at him from the dark edge of the Bloomberg screen, suit immaculate, eyes slightly wild. A man who still believed charm could fix a collapsing world. Outside the glass wall of his office, employees passed by without looking in, as if the corner office had already become a museum exhibit, as if the king had already been replaced, and no one wanted to be caught mourning him. The iron gates looked like they belonged in another century. They rose from the hillside in black curves and sharp points, wet with morning mist, framed by stone pillars that carried old moss in their seams. Beyond them, a long drive vanished between cypress trees, the kind planted for permanence, not decoration. The ocean was somewhere behind the estate, close enough to smell salt and wet rock carried on the wind. Daniel stood outside the gate with his hands shoved into the pockets of a suit that suddenly felt like costume. The collar sat wrong against his neck. The fabric was too clean for the place he'd been dragged into, too loud, too new. Behind him, a rented Mercedes idled, its engine purring like it was embarrassed to be here. Jessica sat inside, scrolling on her phone, legs crossed, her heel tapping impatiently against the floor mat. Every few seconds she looked up at the gate as if staring might make it open faster. Daniel pressed the intercom button again. A metallic click, a thin hiss of static. "This is Daniel Wright," he said, forcing steadiness into his voice. "I'm here to see Her Royal Highness, Princess Catalina. It's urgent." The speaker crackled. A pause stretched long enough to feel deliberate. Then a voice came through, calm, old, precise. "The princess is in the middle of a cello lesson, Mr. Wright," Alfred said. "She is not to be disturbed." Daniel's throat tightened at the name, at the ease of the refusal. He leaned closer to the speaker, the iron cold beneath his palm. "Alfred," he said, softer now, trying a different angle. "Please, I flew across the ocean. I just need 5 minutes. 5. Silence. Jessica honked once from the car, sharp and petulant. She rolled the window down and called out, loud enough to bounce off the stone pillars. "It's hot, Daniel. My heels are sinking into dirt. Can we just call her?" Daniel didn't look back. His jaw clenched. The intercom crackled again. 5 minutes, Alfred said at last. "Do not make me release the hounds. And I am not speaking metaphorically." Daniel's stomach lurched. A low buzz sounded. The heavy gate shuddered, then began to swing inward with slow, deliberate force, metal grinding lightly against metal like teeth. Daniel returned to the Mercedes quickly. Gravel crunched under his shoes. He slid into the driver's seat and pulled forward, Jessica's eyes widening as if the threat had finally reached her. "Did he say hounds?" she hissed. "Shut up!" Daniel snapped, the words sharp enough to make her flinch. He gripped the steering wheel and drove through the gate. The driveway wound upward, flanked by cypress trees that stood tall and silent like guards who didn't need weapons. Their scent was resinous, clean, almost medicinal. The deeper Daniel drove, the quieter everything became. Even the car seemed to lower its voice. The estate appeared gradually, pastel, yellow, and pink stone, wide terraces, arched windows that reflected the sea. It wasn't flashy. It didn't need to be. The wealth here didn't advertise. It assumed. Daniel parked where the gravel widened into a courtyard. His shoes sank slightly into the fine stones as he stepped out. The air was warmer here, salted by the Atlantic. Somewhere nearby, water crashed rhythmically against Cliff's slow, heavy impacts like a pulse. Jessica stepped out last, already frowning at the dust on her shoes. "This is ridiculous," she muttered, squinting at the building. "Where are the staff? Where's the—" A figure moved from the shadow of an archway. Alfred. Same impeccable suit, same posture. His hands were folded behind his back, as if he'd been born with them there. His gaze landed on Daniel first. Not hostile, not welcoming, simply measuring. "Mr. Wright," Alfred said. "Time begins now." Daniel swallowed. "Where is she?" Alfred turned without rushing and began walking, forcing Daniel to follow his pace. Jessica tottered behind, her heels slipping on gravel once, then again. She hissed a curse under her breath. They crossed a stone path into a garden. Wisteria climbed over a wooden pergola, hanging in soft purple clusters that swayed gently in the sea breeze. The scent was sweet and alive. Sunlight filtered through leaves, scattering gold across the ground, and under the pergola sat Catalina. She wore a simple white linen sundress, bare shoulders warmed by the sun. No sash, no tiara, no visible jewelry. The understatement made her feel more untouchable, not less. A cello rested against her body, polished wood catching the light. Her bow moved slowly, drawing a low, mournful note that seemed to fill the garden the way incense fills a church. The sound was rich and deep, vibrating in Daniel's chest before he could stop it. He froze 10 feet away. Catalina did not look up. She finished the phrase, her bow hand steady. The final note lingered, trembling into silence. Even the ocean seemed to pause for it. Daniel's voice came out smaller than he intended. "You never told me you played the cello." Catalina lifted her eyes at last. Her expression was calm, unreadable. "You never asked," she said. "You usually turned up the TV when I tried to practice." Daniel's cheeks burned. He took a step forward, then stopped, remembering the security at the gala, the way the world had physically blocked him from her. "I was an idiot," he said. Jessica scoffed behind him, loud enough to be heard. "Oh my God, this is so dramatic." Alfred's head turned slightly, and Jessica fell silent as if the air itself warned her. Daniel kept his eyes on Catalina. He tried to summon charm, tried to shape his face into remorse. "I didn't know," he said, voice cracking just enough to sound sincere. "If I had—" Catalina tilted her head, the movement small, almost curious. "You didn't know I was a princess?" she asked. "Would it have mattered, Daniel?" The question hung there, clean and sharp. Daniel opened his mouth, then closed it. The truth pressed against his teeth, ugly and obvious. "I loved you," he said anyway, forcing the lie through. Catalina's mouth twitched, not into a smile, into something drier. "You loved what you thought I was," she said. "A quiet thing that wouldn't compete with your ego." Daniel flinched. He moved again, desperation pushing him forward. "I can change," he pleaded. "Jessica was a mistake, a midlife crisis. I want you back us." Behind him, Jessica's nails clicked against her phone case. "Excuse me?" she snapped, offended at being framed as a phase. Catalina didn't look at Jessica. She kept her eyes on Daniel, steady. "You came here because your stock is bleeding," she said. "Because regulators are asking questions. Because you need the Provence permits." Daniel went still. The way she said it, precise, informed, made his stomach drop. "How?" he began. Catalina set the bow down on her knee, slow and controlled, as if ending a performance. "You really don't understand," she said softly. Alfred stepped forward from the shade, carrying a silver tray. On the tray lay a thick, leather-bound portfolio stamped with a gold crest. The same crest. It caught the sun for a second and flashed like a warning. Catalina nodded toward it without looking away from Daniel. "Alfred," she said, "give him what he came for." Alfred approached Daniel and held the portfolio out. Daniel hesitated, then grabbed it too fast, fingers shaking as he pulled it open. The leather smelled expensive and old, like the inside of a private bank. He flipped pages of legal language, his eyes darting over words he didn't want to read. "What is this?" he demanded, voice rising. Catalina's gaze didn't soften. "Page 4, she said. Daniel swallowed and turned. The capitalization table sat there in clean columns. Major shareholders listed like gods. And at the top, towering over them all, Argos Holdings International, 51%. Daniel's breath left his body in a thin, broken sound. His eyes shot up to Catalina. "No," he whispered. Catalina's expression remained perfectly still, but the silence around her felt like a door locking. The ocean crashed again in the distance, heavy and rhythmic, like a countdown. And somewhere behind Daniel, Jessica finally looked up from her phone, sensing that whatever was happening inside that folder was about to decide whether she stayed or fled. Daniel read the number again, as if repetition could change it. 51%. The ink on the cap table looked too clean, too calm for the violence it carried. His fingers tightened on the portfolio's edge until the leather creased beneath his grip. Heat crawled up his neck. The garden's air still smelled of salt and wisteria, but now it felt thin, like he was breathing through paper. He forced out a laugh that sounded like it hurt. "Argos," he said quickly, seizing the first lifeline his brain offered. "Kate, you scared me for a second. Argos is my backer. Zurich, private equity. I closed them myself. They love me." Catalina didn't correct him right away. She watched him the way she had watched the final note of her cello fade patient, letting the silence do part of the work. "You didn't read the fine print," she said at last. Daniel's eyes flashed. "It's a blind trust," he snapped. "That's standard. High net worth funds do that." Catalina lifted her chin toward the open folder. "Turn the page," she said. Her voice wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. Daniel's hand shook as he flipped. A new sheet appeared, dense text, signatures, declarations. His gaze skidded across it, searching for comfort. He found a line in bold, beneficial owner, and beneath it, a name that made his stomach drop as if the ground had vanished. Her Royal Highness, Princess Catalina Marie of the House of Bourbon-Palmer. Signature authority, sole proprietor. Daniel's eyes locked on the signature. The loops, the slant, the pressure marks in the ink. He had seen it on grocery lists, on birthday cards, on a note taped to a book he never read. His mouth opened, but no sound came out at first. Then the words stumbled free. "No," he breathed. This is a forgery." Catalina's gaze held his, blinking. "My family has been in banking since the 17th century," she said calmly. "You built towers. We built vaults." Daniel's knees weakened. He steadied himself by pressing his hand against the pergola post. The wood felt rough under his palm, real and unforgiving. Catalina took a slow step forward. "Do not touch." The warning from the gala echoed in his head, but here no guards appeared. Here, she didn't need them. "Do you remember the liquidity crisis?" she asked. Daniel flinched. He remembered too clearly. The late nights, the phone calls, the desperation that tasted like bile. A night on the kitchen floor. His face in her lap, her hand in his hair. "You were weeks from collapse," Catalina continued, voice soft but sharp at the edges. "You came home shaking. You said you would lose everything." Daniel swallowed hard. His eyes burned. "I believed in you," she said. "So I called my family's trustees. I created Argos to put capital into your company without bruising your pride." The words landed one by one, each heavier than the last. "I bought your debt," Catalina went on. "I covered your losses. Every time you told people you had an angel investor, it was me." Daniel's chest tightened. The air wouldn't go in properly. He took a step forward without meaning to, then stopped, caught between instinct and humiliation. "I didn't know," he choked out. "I swear I didn't." "You didn't need to know," Catalina cut in, and for the first time her tone sharpened into command. "You only needed to treat me like a human being." Daniel's legs gave out. He sank to his knees in the gravel, the stones biting through the fabric of his trousers. He didn't even feel it. His hands hovered helplessly in front of him, as if he were praying to a god who had already turned away. "Kate," he whispered, the name cracking on his tongue. "Please, I can fix this. We can." He reached for the hem of her linen dress. Catalina stepped back, quick and clean, as if avoiding contamination. The movement was small, but it made him feel smaller than the gravel under his knees. "It's too late for partnerships," she said. Behind him, Jessica's voice snapped through the garden, shrill and offended. "Hey, I can hear you, you loser." Catalina didn't look at her. She looked past Daniel. "Alfred," she said. Alfred emerged from the shade with a silver tray, expression composed, eyes cool. On the tray lay a single sheet of paper, crisp and official. He offered it to Daniel without a word. Daniel took it, hands shaking so violently the page trembled. At the top, a title. Notice of Extraordinary Board Meeting. Below, a line that made his vision blur. Motion. Removal of Daniel Wright as Chief Executive Officer for cause. Cause. Gross negligence, breach of fiduciary duty, reputational damage. Vote count. Argos Holdings International, 51%. Outcome. Motion carried. Daniel stared at the words until they stopped, looking like language and started looking like a sentence. "You," he whispered. "You fired me." Catalina's face was calm, almost bored. "Argos invoked the bad boy clause in your contract," she said. "The one triggered by conduct that scandalizes the company." Daniel's throat worked. "I'm the founder." "And you signed the clause," Catalina replied. "You didn't think it would apply to you." The wind moved through the wisteria overhead, petals swaying gently, indifferent. Daniel's eyes darted over the page again, searching for an exit. Who replaces me?" he managed. Catalina's gaze didn't soften. "David," she said. "He's been doing the work while you chased headlines." Daniel's stomach twisted. The shame was hot and physical. "Your access has already been revoked," Catalina added. "Your keycard won't open any door you built." Alfred's voice came then, mild and almost courteous. Security is packing your office as we speak, sir. Your personal effects will be mailed. Daniel's shoulders sagged. He stared at the gravel between his knees, as if he might find a way to rewind time in the stones. Jessica finally marched up the path, phone in hand, eyes narrowed. She looked down at Daniel's posture with disgust, then at the paper with sudden suspicion. Wait, she said sharply. Does this mean he's broke? Catalina turned her eyes to Jessica for the first time. There was no anger in them, only a cool, clinical assessment, as if Jessica were a predictable symptom. The investigations will drain his liquid cash, Catalina said. The settlement is zero. He has no salary. She paused just long enough for the words to settle. So yes, she finished, he is effectively poor. Jessica's face twisted as if she'd tasted something rotten. You told me you were worth billions, she screamed at Daniel, her voice cracked. You liar. I missed Fashion Week for this. Daniel didn't look up. Jessica's eyes flicked back to Catalina, instantly recalibrating. Look, Your Highness, I didn't know. I'm a victim too. He manipulated. Save it, Catalina said, already turning away. She shifted her attention to Alfred with a small nod, as if closing a file. Escort them off the estate, she said, if they are not on the public road in 5 minutes. Her gaze stayed on the garden, not on them, as if they no longer deserved eye contact. Release the dogs, she added, and Alfred use the Dobermans. A faint, satisfied line touched Alfred's mouth. Very good, ma'am. He stepped to Daniel and took his arm with firm, efficient strength. Not violent, just certain. Up you get, sir, Alfred said quietly. Dignity is a lost cause. Let's at least preserve the trousers. Daniel stumbled to his feet, the paper still clenched in his hand. He looked back once. Catalina had already returned to her chair beneath the wisteria. Her bow rose. Her fingers settled on the strings with the ease of someone whose hands had never trembled in a crisis. She drew the bow across the cello. A low, resonant note filled the garden, deep, steady, final. It didn't sound like a song meant to comfort. It sounded like a verdict being carried out. And as Alfred guided them down the path, the crest stamped on the portfolio flashed once in the sun, cold and absolute, as if reminding Daniel of the simplest truth he had never learned. Some doors do not reopen, no matter how hard you knock. 6 months later, New York had no interest in being gentle. The wind on the elevated platform at Queensboro Plaza didn't blow so much as it cut. It found every gap in Daniel's coat cheap synthetic fabric bought on clearance, stiff at the seams, smelling faintly of factory chemicals when it got wet. He kept his shoulders hunched and his hands shoved deep into empty pockets, trying to make his body smaller than the cold. A train screamed into the station, metal grinding on metal. The sound vibrated through the platform and into his teeth. Daniel stepped into the crowded car and took the corner nearest the door, head down, eyes fixed on the gray floor speckled with salt and dirt. He had learned what eye contact invited. Recognition. A phone lifted. A laugh. A clip posted with a caption that wouldn't die. The train lurched forward. Bodies swayed in unison. A man beside him smelled like damp wool and onions. Someone's backpack zipper scraped against Daniel's sleeve. He didn't react. He just rode the motion, letting it carry him toward a job interview that would have sounded like a prank in his old life. Long Island City. A converted warehouse. Logistics. $65,000. He repeated the number in his head like a prayer, not because it excited him, but because it was something solid, something that might keep him from falling all the way through. When he stepped off the train, the wind hit again sharper on the street, laced with exhaust and river damp. Daniel walked past graffiti and loading docks, past a line of delivery trucks with their doors yawning open like mouths. The office inside was fluorescent and unforgiving. No art, no views, just white walls, cheap desks, and the hum of machines. Daniel sat across from a hiring manager who couldn't have been older than 26. The man's nameplate said Kyle. He wore a hoodie and spun a fidget toy between 2 fingers, the plastic clicking softly as it turned. He didn't offer water. Kyle scrolled through Daniel's resume on an iPad, eyes moving fast, expression unreadable. So, Kyle said, stopping the spinner, you've got a gap here. Last 6 months. Daniel's throat tightened. He forced his voice to stay even. I took personal time to reorganize priorities. Kyle's mouth curved, not cruel, just blunt. He tapped the screen once and turned it around. A collage of headlines filled the display. Daniel's face, red and shouting. Words like fraud, scandal, radioactive. The images had been compressed and reposted so many times they looked like copies of copies. Kyle leaned back. "We Googled you," he said. "Everyone does." Daniel's jaw clenched. He tried to keep his expression neutral, but something hot and bitter rose behind his eyes anyway. "I wasn't charged," Daniel said. "It was civil. Record-keeping errors." Kyle shrugged. "Doesn't matter. Perception is reality." He paused, then added with a casual sting. "You said that in your talk years ago. I watched it in college." The irony hit harder than the cold ever had. Daniel stared at the iPad, seeing his own words turned into a lock on a door he couldn't open. Kyle stood, already reaching for the edge of the desk as if ending the meeting were the only part of it that mattered. "My boss would kill me if I hired you. Clients see your name, they run. We handle sensitive accounts. We can't attach drama to the brand." Drama. As if his life had become a stain you could scrub off by avoiding the person. "Thanks for coming in," Kyle said, already half-turned toward the door. "Good luck out there." Daniel walked out into the warehouse corridor, the fluorescent light buzzing above him like a swarm. He felt heavier than the concrete under his shoes. Outside, the winter air slapped his face again, and for a second he welcomed it because it was honest. He walked without aim. The city moved around him, deliverymen shouting, sirens far off, footsteps splashing through slush. Nobody made room for him. Nobody looked twice. In a strange way, invisibility was its own punishment. Not hated enough to be chased, not valued enough to be noticed. His stomach knotted. He needed warmth. He needed coffee. He found a small deli on a corner, windows fogged with steam. A bell jingled as he pushed the door open. Heat wrapped around him, thick with the smell of bacon grease and burnt coffee. The air tasted like salt and fryer oil. Daniel counted the crumpled bills in his hand. "Enough for a coffee." He stepped to the counter. "Regular coffee," he said, voice low. "Black." $3. The man behind the counter grunted. Daniel paid and took the paper cup, wrapping both hands around it as if he could absorb heat through his skin. A television hung in the corner above a row of tables. It was muted, captions crawling along the bottom. Men in work boots leaned back in their chairs, chewing sandwiches, eyes on the screen. "Turn it up," one of them said. "It's starting." The counterman grabbed a remote and clicked. The sound filled the room. Crowd murmurs, organ music, a formal voice. The screen was drenched in gold, a palace interior. Rows of guests in dark suits and glittering dresses, faces turned toward an altar. Text crawled across the bottom. Royal wedding. Daniel's grip tightened on the cup. Hot coffee sloshed over the rim and splashed onto his wrist. He didn't flinch. He barely felt it. The camera panned and found her. Catalina stood at the altar in ivory lace, a train trailing behind her like a river. The tiara caught the light and scattered it in hard diamonds. But it was her face that stopped Daniel's breath. She was smiling. Not the controlled, diplomatic curve he'd seen in public. A real smile that reached her eyes. Beside her stood a man in a tuxedo with calm hands and a steady posture. He held her fingers gently, like they were something you protected, not something you owned. The anchor's voice was bright and reverent, speaking of fairy tale endings and duty and legacy. Captions rolled with numbers and titles, flashes of global leaders in the front row, applause swelling like waves. Daniel's throat tightened until it hurt. He watched Catalina lift her chin, radiant, unafraid of the world's gaze because the world's gaze finally belonged to her again. A man at the table nearest the TV whistled softly. "That's a classy lady," he said through a mouthful of food. "Lucky guy. Imagine letting her go." Daniel's vision blurred. He blinked hard, but the wetness stayed. His mind supplied images without permission. A quiet apartment, a Sunday morning, pancakes cooling on a plate he barely touched, a book open on her lap while he scrolled his phone, irritated by the silence she loved, a gift bag with a vacuum cleaner, presented like generosity. The way she had looked at him, not angry, not begging, just disappointed, as if she'd already seen the end and had decided not to fight the inevitable. On the screen, Catalina leaned toward the man beside her. Their kiss was brief and tender, respectful in a way Daniel suddenly realized he had never been. The deli erupted into soft applause, half mocking, half sincere. People clapped for the spectacle, for the romance, for the feeling that something beautiful existed far away from their cold city streets. Daniel stood frozen, coffee cooling in his hands. Then the counterman's voice cut through the room, impatient and blunt. "Hey, buddy, you buying something else? This ain't a library. You can't just stand there watching TV." Daniel's body jolted, as if he'd been slapped awake. He glanced down at his cup, at the stained sleeve of his cheap coat, at his cracked watch. He looked back at the TV one last time. Catalina walked down the aisle through a shower of light and confetti. For a fraction of a second, she turned her head toward the camera, and the angle made it feel like her gaze traveled straight through the screen, straight through the deli, and landed on him. There was no anger in her face, no triumph, just distance, completion. Daniel's lips parted. His voice came out broken and small. "I'm done," he whispered. He turned away from the TV's warm glow and pushed the deli door open. The bell jingled again, bright and indifferent. The winter hit him immediately, stinging his eyes. Tears gathered anyway, and the cold caught them before they could fall, freezing them at the edges of his lashes. Daniel zipped his coat, shoved his hands into his empty pockets, and started walking toward the subway, blending into the gray crowd beneath a gray sky. A man once known for buying silence now had nothing left to purchase. Not forgiveness, not status, not time. Only the wind, biting and endless, following him down the street. Snow clung to his lashes like frozen tears.